more than 700 Israelis are now feared dead.
It's been Gaza's deadliest day in 15 years, and 2 million Palestinians living there are now bracing for what's to come. Israel has formally declared a state of war.
Today marks exactly 1 year since the Israel-Hamas War started on October 7th, 2023. Since the war started, over half of Gaza's buildings have been damaged or destroyed, 80% of Palestinians displaced, and tens of thousands of people dead. Over the past year, we've heard the word ceasefire popping up numerous times, but a humanitarian pause and hostage exchange deal only occurred once in November 2023, 11 months ago. There have been numerous times when a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas seemed imminent, but 1 year on, no deal has been reached. So why is a permanent ceasefire so hard to achieve? The two biggest parties in any ceasefire agreement are Israel and Hamas, but they are not the only ones involved in the talks. The US is the main security partner to Israel and is seen as the only global power still influential in the Middle East. We also have Qatar, a US ally who also hosted many Hamas officials, and Egypt, who shares a border with Gaza with long-standing concerns about the stability of the Gaza Strip. Egypt also played a key role in previous ceasefire talks involving Hamas and Israel.
Qatar and Egypt have been the chief brokers of ceasefire negotiations between the conflicting parties. But you also have the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, which also put forward a vision for a day after in Gaza, and they expressed willingness to play a role in a temporary international mission in a post-war scenario. There's also coordination between Middle Eastern leaders with the US, and Secretary Blinken has been very active in the region. So at the recent UN General Assembly session, Saudi Arabia also announced that it would implement and introduce an initiative called the International Coalition to implement the two-state solution. I think that fundamentally it has to be, a Palestinian willingness to accept and to ask or request for a two-state solution. And also, of course, if you're talking about the conflicting parties, then the Israelis must also be agreeable to the same proposal.
We've seen that over the previous months, anytime there was a failure of getting a ceasefire approved, this was either because of Israeli rejections or Hamas rejection.
In October 2023, a Russia-backed ceasefire proposal at the United Nations was vetoed by the US, as it did not include Israel's right to self-defense. While the US, Qatar, and Egypt cannot impose a ceasefire agreement on both sides, they have been pushing for a deal between Israel and Hamas. In August, the US, Egypt, and Qatar released a joint statement calling for immediate relief to the long-suffering people of Gaza and the long-suffering hostages and their families. The statement mentioned a framework agreement endorsed by a UN Security Council resolution, with only the details of implementation left to be worked out. So, what is this framework? Various proposals have been put forward by the United Nations Security Council, as well as Egyptian and Qatari mediators, with the timeline of the ceasefire ranging from weeks to months. The main framework of the ceasefire revolved around a three-phase deal endorsed by US President Joe Biden. The first phase would see a 6-week pause in fighting while Israeli forces withdrew from all populated areas of Gaza. At the same time, 33 hostages, including women, both civilians and soldiers, elderly and wounded people would be released by Hamas. 30 Palestinian detainees will be released in exchange for each Israeli civilian, and 50 detainees for each female soldier. Remains of the dead hostages would also be returned. Meanwhile, Gazans would be allowed to return to their homes. Israel would also have to allow the entry of sufficient humanitarian aid trucks, as well as fuel trucks for operating Gaza's power plant, trade, rubble removal, hospitals, health centers, and bakeries in all areas of Gaza. The second phase, which would also last for 6 weeks, involves the release of all remaining Israeli hostages, which includes male soldiers, for an agreed-upon number of Palestinian prisoners. This phase would also include a full Israeli withdrawal from all of Gaza and commit to a lasting truce, as long as Hamas sticks to its side of the bargain, which involves not rebuilding its military arsenal. The third and last stage includes the return of any remaining bodies of the deceased hostages. This phase also includes a 5-year reconstruction plan for Gaza to rebuild and see an end to the military blockade of the enclave. With such a definitive framework, the question is, why do ceasefire talks keep breaking down? As of September 25, 2024, the US said that talks between the two sides have stalled for weeks. This comes after the US said that a ceasefire deal is on the verge of an agreement. While the goals of the November 2023 temporary deal were to conduct a prisoner exchange and get humanitarian aid into Gaza, The objective of the most recent ceasefire talks focused on ending the fighting.
When you add, let's say, the Israeli demands and the demands of Hamas, it's very difficult to find room or a settlement range where both sides would consider that they can live with the agreement. Israel has made no secret that it wants to get rid of Hamas. It wants to destroy the organization, and it will probably target all the operatives, the leaders that have been in one way or another involved in the attacks of October 7. That is part of the Israeli strategic culture.
This sentiment has been persistent throughout the talks. Israel has said that they are willing to pause the fighting, but show no sign of wanting to end the fight permanently, as long as Hamas's governing and military structures remain intact. For Hamas, a permanent ceasefire has been one of the main demands, and the group has rejected proposals where a permanent end to the fighting was not included in negotiations. On May 6, 2024, Hamas accepted a ceasefire proposal by Qatar and Egypt, which followed the three-phase framework and promises a permanent end to the fighting. However, Israel rejected this ceasefire proposal, claiming that the terms of the negotiations differed from previous proposals it had seen. 2 days after, on May 8, Israel's invasion of Rafah began, ending ceasefire talks for a period. Both sides have blamed the other for the failure of the ceasefire talks. Hamas blamed Israel for adding new conditions to the proposals, while Israel claimed Hamas wanted to add changes to the original proposal. But a key issue remained unchanged: the release of detainees and hostages from both sides.
That has always been a tactic, if not a strategy, of Hamas to use Israeli hostages as a bargaining chip. To improve the conditions of the Palestinians in Gaza, to ease the flow of goods, the flow of individuals from Gaza, and also to get the release of Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli prisons, either political prisoners or people that were arrested on administrative detention.